Lena's life looked ordinary on the outside, but inside she was slowly rebuilding herself. She worked as a nurse in a city hospital, where every day was full of long shifts, patients needing care, and colleagues leaning on each other for support. Her job was demanding, but it gave her purpose. She liked being the person people trusted when they were at their weakest. At the same time, her personal life was fragile. A few months earlier, she had ended a difficult relationship with Mark, a police officer. Their story had started with laughter and charm, but it ended with silence and fear. She had made a promise to herself: no more second chances, no more late-night phone calls, no surprise visits. She wanted peace. Mark, on the other hand, struggled to accept the breakup. Out in public, he wore the uniform and the smile that made people respect him. But in private, he sent Lena messages that bounced between sweet apologies and sharp blame. One evening he might say, "I'm sorry, I know I made mistakes." The next morning he would write, "You'll never find anyone like me." Lena tried not to respond. She had learned that silence was safer than arguing. But ignoring him didn't stop the pressure. The more distance she tried to create, the more he pushed. Lena leaned on her small circle for strength. Her sister Aisha called her every night to ask if she had eaten and to remind her she wasn't alone. Her neighbor, Mrs. Collins, always had time for tea and casual chats in the hallway. At the hospital, her co-workers knew something was weighing on her, and they tried to cover her shifts when she needed a break. These little acts of kindness kept her steady. Still, in the back of her mind, she knew she had to stay alert. She had installed a doorbell camera after a few uneasy evenings when she thought she heard footsteps outside her apartment. It was a small measure, but it gave her comfort. If anything happened, there would be proof. Her days were full but predictable. Wake up early, head to the hospital, check on patients, chart reports, return home, cook something simple, and fall asleep with exhaustion. Yet every so often, her phone buzzed with a message that reminded her that Mark hadn't truly let go. She would stare at the screen, debating whether to block him again or keep the messages as evidence of his persistence. She chose the second option. She was a nurse, she understood patterns, and she knew documentation mattered. In the same way she wrote notes about her patients, she kept notes about her life with Mark. It wasn't just memory anymore, it was evidence. Mark's frustration grew with each week. He told himself he just wanted another chance. He believed he could fix everything if Lena would just listen. But in reality, his actions weren't about love, they were about control. When Lena ignored his calls, he found excuses to drive by her street. When she didn't answer his messages, he wrote longer ones, some filled with warmth, others sharp like knives. His world, once filled with authority and respect, now revolved around a single obsession, forcing Lena back into his life. Lena tried not to let fear take over. She filled her evenings with small joys, listening to old songs she loved, watering the plants on her balcony, and calling Aisha to talk about everyday things. She told herself she wasn't going to give Mark the power to ruin her peace. But deep down, she knew this wasn't finished. She could sense it, the way a nurse senses a patient's condition before the tests confirm it. Something was coming, and she needed to be ready. One weekend, she had dinner with her sister at a small restaurant. Aisha noticed how Lena looked over her shoulder every time the door opened. "You're still thinking about him, aren't you?" she asked softly. Lena nodded. "I just don't want him to show up again." Aisha reached across the table, squeezed her hand, and said, "If he does, you're not alone. Remember that." Lena smiled, grateful, but her mind stayed restless. She knew her sister meant well, but when Mark appeared, it was Lena who had to stand firm. And that wasn't easy. The turning point came late one evening. Lena had just returned from a long shift, her scrubs still smelling faintly of disinfectant. She set down her bag, kicked off her shoes, and poured herself a cup of tea. The quiet was comforting. Then the doorbell rang. She froze. Visitors were rare, especially at night. She glanced at the camera on her phone screen. There he was, Mark, standing at her door, looking straight into the lens. Her heart sank. She didn't answer. Instead, she stayed still, hoping he would leave. But he didn't. He knocked, then spoke loudly enough for the microphone to catch every word. Lena, we need to talk. You can't keep ignoring me. I know you still love me. His voice was steady, but there was an edge that made her skin crawl. She put down her tea, her hands trembling. She whispered to herself, stay calm. Just stay calm. That night marked the beginning of something Lena had hoped to avoid. What started as uneasy text messages and late-night calls had turned into a confrontation at her own door. She felt both fear and resolve. She knew the truth, this wasn't about love, and it wasn't going to end with apologies. And deep inside, she realized something else: every choice she made from this moment on would shape what came. Lena sat frozen as Mark stood outside her door, his voice echoing through the hallway and spilling into her apartment through the camera feed. She had faced emergencies at the hospital, she had calmed frightened patients and made decisions in the most stressful moments, but nothing compared to the fear of someone you once trusted standing at your doorstep, demanding control over your heart. Her breathing grew heavy, but she reminded herself quietly, stay calm, don't open the door. Mark's tone shifted from pleading to commanding. You can't keep ignoring me, Lena. We belong together. You're going to listen tonight. His voice was low but firm, the kind of voice that left no space for disagreement. The more he spoke, the more Lena realized he was no longer trying to win her heart, he was trying to take it by force. When she didn't answer, he knocked harder. She could hear the thud against the wooden frame, steady and sharp. Neighbors stirred. She imagined someone peeking through their peephole, wondering what was happening. Her phone trembled in her hand. She opened the emergency dial screen, her finger hovering over it. In her mind, a storm of thoughts crashed. What if I call? What if he hears the sirens? Will he get worse? Then Mark made his mistake. He leaned close to the door and said, if I have to show you how serious I am, I will. The doorbell camera caught his words, his expression, and the heavy shadow of his posture. Lena knew exactly what he meant. She pressed the call button. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline. Lena whispered quickly, my ex is outside my door. He's a police officer. He has a weapon. He's threatening me. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to stay steady. The operator assured her officers were on the way and asked her to stay inside, stay quiet, and keep the line open. Mark, unaware of the call, continued. His words bounced between sweet and sharp, just open the door, let's talk, followed by, don't make me do something you'll regret. Lena felt every second stretch into a lifetime. Down the hall, a neighbor named Daniel cracked his door open. He had heard the knocking and the tense voice. Discreetly, he lifted his phone and began recording. His video captured the hallway scene: Mark standing rigid, his badge clipped to his belt, his hand brushing near his holster as if reminding Lena of his power. Daniel knew it wasn't safe to interfere, but recording could matter. Inside, Lena gripped the phone. She whispered to the dispatcher, he's still here. He won't leave. The operator encouraged her, reminding her that help was near. Lena could already hear faint sirens in the distance. Relief and fear tangled inside her chest. When the sirens grew louder, Mark stiffened. He realized others could hear, others could see. Panic flickered across his face. Without another word, he stepped back and hurried down the hall, disappearing into the stairwell. Lena didn't dare move until she heard a firm knock from the other side of the door. Police. It's safe now. She opened the door cautiously to find two uniformed officers standing there, hands raised in reassurance. Behind them, Daniel held up his phone nervously, saying, "I recorded part of it." Another neighbor whispered, "We heard everything." Lena felt tears slip down her cheeks, not of weakness, but of sheer release. For the first time, she wasn't carrying this alone. The officers asked her to describe everything, from the moment he arrived to the words he used. She showed them the saved texts, the doorbell camera feed, and pointed to Daniel, who passed over his recording. They nodded, serious. One officer said, "You did the right thing. We'll make sure this is handled." That night, Lena didn't sleep. She sat at her table with Aisha on speakerphone, recounting every detail. Her sister's voice shook with anger and worry, but she reminded Lena she was brave. "You stood up for yourself, even when you were scared," Aisha said. Lena whispered back, "I didn't feel brave. I just felt cornered." But inside, a quiet strength began to rise. The next day, the department placed Mark on leave while Internal Affairs opened an investigation. His colleagues were shocked, many had admired him. But as evidence piled up, texts, voicemails, the video footage, it became clear this wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern. The image of a disciplined officer clashed with the truth of a man unable to let go. For Lena, the following weeks were heavy. She had to retell the story again and again to investigators, to attorneys, to advocates. Each time was exhausting, but she reminded herself that each word was a step toward justice. The victim advocate explained her rights, protective orders, and how the court process would unfold. Lena listened carefully, taking notes like she did at the hospital. Knowledge gave her a small sense of control. Mark tried once more to reach her, this time with a letter slipped into her mailbox. It was full of apologies, promises, and excuses. But Lena didn't open it fully. She handed it straight to the investigators. She had learned that love doesn't need force, and apologies mean nothing without change. At work, her co-workers noticed the tired look in her eyes. They covered her shifts when she had court dates, left small notes of encouragement in her locker, and made her laugh during breaks. Patience, too, unknowingly gave her strength. When an elderly man thanked her for holding his hand during a procedure, she realized that even in her darkest days, she was still capable of giving comfort to others. The incident had shaken her, but it had also revealed something important: she wasn't alone. Neighbors, co-workers, her sister, even strangers like the dispatcher on the phone, people had stood by her. That knowledge became her anchor. And yet, Lena also knew the story was far from over. The law would now take its course. There would be hearings, arguments, and a final judgment. Mark's actions had forced him onto a path he could no longer control. And Lena, though weary, was ready to walk her path too, not as a victim, but as a witness to the truth. Okay, for part 3, I'm focusing on rising complications, gathering evidence, mounting pressure, fear, and protective measures. Lena's safety planning could include moving apartments. Mark's outreach starts shifting. The community's reaction and media involvement could grow too, with Internal Affairs, the DA, and possibly a grand jury getting involved. This sets up the tension leading into the confrontation in part 4. For part 3, I'll include elements like the protective order hearing, Daniel's video, and the doorbell camera footage, all contributing to case building. I'll add phone logs, Mark's union rep responding, and a temporary restraining order for added tension. Along with victim advocacy, safety plans, and therapy, I'll subtly weave in trauma responses, community rumors, and witness intimidation risks, all without violence, of course. I'll aim for 1,300 words to keep the flow intact. For the case, I'll focus on defining clear steps, meeting with the ADA, building a timeline, and gathering crucial evidence like call logs and cloud video retrieval. Lena's safety plan includes heightened precautions. I'll also highlight her support system, like Aisha symbolizing calm with wind chimes. Alongside investigative progress, the DA considers charges. In part 3, I can start building toward the grand jury in part 4. Maybe the DA is preparing to present soon. I'll include Mark's perspective, showing his denial and reactions from his co-workers. He attends a hearing and starts to show stress under media pressure, including some supportive and critical online comments. Lena stays offline but faces personal friction when a friend urges her to drop the case. Done. Lena woke up before dawn, the sky still grey outside her window. She sat on the edge of her bed and listened to the quiet, reminding herself she was safe. The door was locked. The camera worked. Her sister's number was pinned to the fridge. She breathed in slowly and out slowly, the way the hospital counselor had taught her, 4 counts in, 6 counts out. It didn't erase the fear, but it gave her a place to stand. At the hospital, she moved through her morning routine, checking charts, warming a blanket for a patient who felt cold, adjusting in 4-line with steady hands. Work felt like solid ground. People needed her for simple, human reasons: pain medicine on time, a calm voice before a test, a smile when family couldn't visit. Those small acts kept her anchored. But every break between tasks carried a new message from the detective or the victim advocate, and each message reminded her that her private life had become a case file with dates, times, and attachments. In the afternoon, the detective and the internal affairs investigator met Lena in a small conference room near the hospital's security office. She placed her phone on the table and scrolled through her saved messages. She had learned to document everything: dates written in the corner of a notebook, screenshots labeled, voicemail files saved with short notes like apology or pressure. She handed over a printed list of call logs. The detective nodded, grateful and serious. "You've done a lot of our work for us," he said gently. "It helps." They asked her to speak again about the night at the door, slowly this time, in her own words. She told the story steadily, without raising her voice. She explained the earlier texts that didn't feel right, the moments she thought she heard footsteps, the decision to install the camera, the heavy knock, the words she could never forget. Their questions were careful and respectful. What time was it? How long did he stay? What did he say exactly? Did anyone else see or hear? She mentioned her neighbor Daniel. She mentioned the sirens in the distance and the relief that washed over her when she heard the officers' voices. A few days later, Lena met the assistant district attorney, a woman named Ria, who had gentle eyes and a clear way of explaining complicated things. Ria walked her through what might happen: possible charges, a protective order, hearings, and a trial if it came to that. "We will build this on facts," Ria said. "Your words matter. The videos matter. The pattern matters." She explained how the doorbell camera's footage would be authenticated, how timestamps from the hallway video and phone logs could line up like puzzle pieces. "You won't be alone in this," she added. The sentence warmed Lena more than the coffee she held. A temporary protective order was granted, then extended. The judge spoke carefully and firmly, making rules plain: no contact, no approach, no messages through friends. The order felt like a fence, not a wall, not a fortress, but a useful line that could be defended. Still, Lena understood a paper alone could not calm her racing heart at night. So she took practical steps. She changed passwords. She turned off location sharing with old contacts. She asked the landlord to install a stronger deadbolt. The landlord agreed and added brighter lights in the hallway. Hospital security gave her a parking pass for a spot closer to the entrance and told night staff to watch for her. These small acts, stacked together, felt like a careful plan. News started to move, not as headlines but as whispers. A neighborhood blog posted about an incident on Lena's street. A few comments asked for details. Some people guessed. Others reminded the group not to spread rumors. At the station where Mark worked, colleagues kept their conversations quiet. A few believed he could do no wrong. A few had noticed things: snapped comments, tight shoulders, a need to be right, and wondered if they had missed a warning sign. Internal Affairs interviewed everyone. Some officers felt pulled in two directions, personal loyalty and professional duty. The careful questions and careful answers filled long hours in small rooms. For Mark, the days were heavy in a different way. Placed on leave, he sat in his apartment, meeting often with a union attorney who told him not to contact Lena, not even once, not even to apologize. The attorney said, "Every word can be used. Don't add to it." Mark drafted messages he never sent. He scrolled through old photos and told himself stories about love, mistakes, and second chances. But the videos existed. The call logs existed. His drafts stayed drafts, and the unsent words felt like stones in his pocket. One afternoon, Lena and Aisha visited the victim advocacy office together. The advocate, a calm man named Guillermo, showed them how to make a safety plan: keep a small bag ready with documents and a spare phone charger, tell a trusted neighbor the safest time to reach you, choose a code word with family for call me now. He did not make promises he couldn't keep. He only gave tools. Before they left, he said, "Healing can be as simple as a routine. It sounds small, but it adds up." Aisha squeezed Lena's hand and said, "We will make a routine that keeps you safe and helps you rest." Ria scheduled a day for mock testimony so Lena could practice what it might feel like to sit in a courtroom and answer questions. The conference room felt nothing like a courtroom, but the exercise mattered. Ria asked Lena to tell her story from the beginning, then interrupted with fair but tough questions. "Why didn't you respond to his messages? How do you remember the exact words he said? Is it possible you misunderstood?" Lena answered simply, without drama. "I didn't respond because it wasn't safe. I remember because my body remembers." And the camera recorded his words. When they finished, Ria smiled. "You did well. We'll lean on the evidence. You just have to tell the truth." Walking home that evening, Lena stopped by the small shop on the corner and bought a new plant, a little fern with soft, green fronds. At home, she placed it on the kitchen windowsill where the light was kind. She saw the plant every morning and every night, and each time she watered it, she felt a little stronger. It was a tiny ritual, but it marked a new chapter: growth, even in a small pot. Complications still came. A mutual acquaintance texted her, "He's losing everything. Maybe you can forgive and move on?" "He's sorry." Lena put the phone down and breathed. She had promised herself not to argue by text. When she was ready, she replied with one sentence, "Accountability is not cruelty." Then she muted the thread and went back to her notes. She had learned to guard her energy. Daniel, the neighbor, received a formal request to provide his video. He was nervous, but he agreed. "I just held up my phone," he told Lena when they met by the mailboxes. "I thought maybe it could help." Lena thanked him, her voice soft. "It helps more than you know." He nodded and admitted he hadn't slept well for a few nights. "Seeing it up close. It changes how you think about what normal looks like," he said. They shared a quiet moment. Two neighbors suddenly pulled into the same difficult story. Back at the hospital, Lena's supervisor arranged shorter shifts for a few weeks. Colleagues stepped in with kindness disguised as practical help: extra coverage at the nurse's station, a favorite snack tucked behind the coffee machine, a silly sticker left on her clipboard. On a busy evening, a patient squeezed Lena's hand and whispered, "You're the calm in this room." The words stayed with her long after the shift ended. She realized she could be calm here, and that calm belonged to her. No one could take it. As the investigation deepened, Ria updated Lena. Digital forensics had confirmed the timestamps, the audio quality from the door camera was clear, the hallway video matched the timeline. There would likely be an indictment. The idea brought a swirl of feelings: hope, fear, relief, sadness. Accountability, even when right, can feel heavy. Lena walked to her balcony and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. She noticed how her block held both noise and peace at the same time: cars, footsteps, laughter, and the quiet glow from kitchen windows where dinners were being made. Life continued, imperfect and steady. On a quiet weekend, Aisha came over with a bag of simple comforts: tea with calming herbs, a soft throw blanket, and a tiny box of wind chimes. "For the balcony," Aisha said. "So you hear something gentle when the wind moves, not just cars and sirens." They hung the chimes together. The sound was light and bright, like a friendly whisper. For the first time in weeks, Lena laughed without forcing it. There were moments when worry returned fast and loud. Lena would wake from a dream with her heart beating hard, unsure for a second where she was. When that happened, she followed her routine: turn on a small lamp, drink a sip of water, stand by the window, look at the fern, count the breaths. She reminded herself of what was real: the lock, the light, the order on paper, the neighbors who cared, the videos, the notes, the plan. She reminded herself that truth, once steady, does not disappear overnight. Meanwhile, Ria and the investigators prepared a simple narrative for the next legal step: a timeline on one page, key messages on another, a list of witnesses, and the short videos cued to the exact seconds that mattered. "Keep it clear," Ria told the team. "Respectful. No drama. Just the truth." They planned to take the case to a grand jury soon. It was not the end, it was a door to the next room. On the eve of her next meeting, Lena brewed tea and sat under the soft throw blanket. She opened her notebook and wrote 3 lines: "I told the truth. The truth has proof. I am not alone." She closed the notebook and let the simple words settle in her chest. Outside, the wind chimes sang a small song. Inside, the fern leaned toward the quiet light. And Lena, though tired, felt ready for whatever came next, not because she had no fear, but because she had something stronger than fear: a plan, a community, and the calm that comes from standing on solid ground. The grand jury met on a rainy morning, and Lena sat in a waiting room with her sister Aisha by her side. She felt as if every tick of the clock was louder than the last. The prosecutors moved in and out of the chamber with stacks of files, video clips cued on small screens, and witness lists in hand. For weeks, she had prepared herself for this moment, but the weight of it pressed heavily on her chest. This was no longer only her story, it was now an official case of justice against someone who once wore the badge of protection. Inside the grand jury, the evidence was presented step by step. The doorbell camera recording played first, showing Mark's voice and words, clear and steady in the quiet room. Jurors leaned forward, listening. The hallway video from Daniel's phone followed, revealing posture, tone, and the shadow of a hand near his holster. Then came the text messages, read aloud in sequence: apologies, demands, and warnings. The pattern became impossible to ignore. When Lena was finally called in, she walked carefully to the front and raised her right hand to take the oath. Her palms were damp, but her voice was firm. She recounted what happened, beginning with the breakup months before, then the repeated attempts to pressure her, and finally that night at the door. She did not dramatize, she spoke plainly. Jurors asked a few quiet questions: did he ever apologize in person after that night? Were you frightened for your safety? Her answers were calm, but honest: yes, he tried to apologize with a letter, but I gave it to investigators, and yes, I feared he would not stop until something worse happened. Hours later, the grand jury delivered its decision: indictment. Mark would face trial for assault, coercion, and abuse of official authority. It was not yet victory, but it was a doorway to accountability. Lena felt both relief and sorrow. Relief that the truth was being seen, sorrow that it had come to this. The trial date was set months ahead. In the meantime, preparation intensified. The assistant district attorney, Ria, held frequent meetings with Lena, walking her through questions she might face on the witness stand. They rehearsed cross-examination. Why didn't you block his number earlier? Ria asked, playing the role of defense. Lena replied with calm, because I knew saving the messages showed the truth better than my memory could. They practiced again and again, until Lena's answers became steady rhythms instead of nervous guesses. The defense team, meanwhile, built their own story. They argued that Mark had never meant harm, that he was a man broken by heartbreak, that his words were misunderstood. They tried to paint Lena as overly cautious, even unforgiving. Friends of Mark whispered that he was just emotional, while others remained silent, not wanting to be drawn into the storm. The courtroom, when the trial began, was quiet but heavy. Reporters lined the benches, careful not to make noise. Lena sat with Aisha, hands intertwined. Across the room, Mark entered with his attorney. He looked smaller without the badge, his uniform replaced by a plain suit. Yet his eyes flicked toward Lena as if he still wanted control. She steadied herself and looked away. Opening statements set the stage. The prosecution spoke of a trusted officer who had used fear instead of respect. The defense spoke of a misunderstanding born from love. The jury watched, expressionless, as each side prepared to unfold the story. When it was her turn to testify, Lena walked to the stand. She felt the eyes of strangers on her, but she kept her focus on the attorney's voice. She told her story once more, clear and plain. The doorbell video played behind her, and she confirmed, "Yes, that is his voice. Yes, those were his words." She pointed out the timeline of texts, explained her reasons for documenting them, and repeated that her only wish was peace, not revenge. The defense tried to shake her. They asked, "Isn't it true you could have misheard his tone?" She answered, "The recording shows the tone clearly." They asked, "Couldn't he have just meant to talk?" She replied, "Talking does not require threats or a weapon." Each answer was calm, steady, and truthful. Neighbors testified too. Daniel described what he saw in the hallway, his video playing on the screen. Mrs. Collins explained how she had heard heavy knocking that frightened her. Officers who responded that night shared their reports. Piece by piece, the case grew stronger. Finally, Mark himself took the stand. He spoke softly, saying he had been overwhelmed, that he only wanted to save what he believed was love. He admitted showing up uninvited but denied meaning harm. Yet when the prosecutor asked, "Why mention force if you didn't mean it?" his answers faltered. Silence hung in the air. Closing arguments painted two pictures, the defense of a man misunderstood, the prosecution of a man who crossed a line that must never be crossed. The jury listened in silence. Then they left to deliberate. Hours passed, each minute heavy. Lena sat with Aisha, holding her hand tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. At last, the jury returned. The four-person stood and read the verdict, guilty on all major counts. The words landed like thunder in the room. Some gasped quietly, others sat stunned. Mark lowered his head. Lena closed her eyes, a single tear falling down her cheek. She did not feel joy, only release. Justice had spoken. As the judge dismissed the court, he spoke directly, "No one has the right to force another into love or fear. Authority is a responsibility, not a weapon." This case is a reminder that justice applies to all, regardless of position. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions, but Lena gave no statement. She simply walked with her sister to the waiting car. The trial was over, but her life was still ahead. She whispered to herself as they drove away, "I'm free." That night, she returned home to the soft sound of the wind chimes Aisha had given her. She watered the fern, brewed her tea, and sat quietly. The verdict had closed one chapter. Another was waiting to be written, not defined by fear, but by healing, hope, and the knowledge that truth had prevailed. Pulled back and sunlight had finally broken through. She sat by the balcony, tea in hand, and listened to the soft sound of the wind chimes that her sister had given her. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the need to glance nervously at the doorbell camera feed every few minutes. The fear that had lived inside her chest like a stubborn shadow was finally loosening its grip. The conviction of Mark was more than a legal result, it was a clear signal that truth mattered, even against someone who had once worn the badge of authority. For Lena, it meant her story had been heard, her courage had not been wasted, and her nights might slowly return to peace. But healing was not instant. It would come in small steps, like drops of water slowly filling an empty cup. In the days following the trial, Lena focused on ordinary things. She woke early, watered her fern, and took long walks in the park near her home. The trees stood tall and quiet, reminding her that life had its seasons. Storms passed, and new leaves always came. On one of these walks, a gentle breeze carried the laughter of children playing nearby, and Lena realized how long it had been since she truly noticed the simple music of everyday life. Her community surrounded her with kindness. Neighbors checked in often, asking if she needed groceries or simply stopping by for a short conversation at her door. Daniel, the neighbor who had recorded the video, admitted he still thought about that night. "It taught me that silence can be dangerous," he said softly. Lena thanked him again, this time not only for the recording, but for his courage in choosing to act when it mattered. Mrs. Collins brought over homemade soup and shared stories of her own youth, reminding Lena that strength often shows itself in quiet endurance. At the hospital, her colleagues welcomed her back warmly. A small card signed by everyone waited in her locker, "We're proud of you. Keep shining." During breaks, they made sure she laughed, pulling her into light-hearted conversations about music, food, and everyday hospital chaos. Patients continued to remind her why she loved nursing. One elderly woman, noticing the tired lines under Lena's eyes, squeezed her hand and whispered, "You have a healing heart. Don't let anyone dim that light." Those words became a mantra that Lena carried with her. Meanwhile, the department where Mark once worked began to make changes. Leaders spoke openly about the importance of accountability, reminding everyone that authority could never be used as a weapon. New training programs were introduced, teaching officers about boundaries, respect, and the dangers of abuse of power. For Lena, knowing that her case might prevent another person from going through what she had endured gave her a sense of quiet purpose. Her sister Aisha remained her closest pillar of strength. They celebrated small victories together: a full night's sleep, a day without anxiety, a moment of laughter without guilt. One evening, Aisha brought a small box with a silver bracelet inside. It carried a simple engraving, "Strong enough." Lena wore it daily, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of her resilience. As weeks turned into months, Lena allowed herself to dream again. She took a short course on painting at a local community center, rediscovering the joy of creating with colors. Her first painting was of a sunrise, bold strokes of orange and gold spreading across a canvas. When she showed it to Aisha, her sister smiled and said, "It looks like freedom." Lena laughed, surprised by how true it felt. The community began to see Lena not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of strength. At a neighborhood meeting, she spoke briefly about the importance of speaking up, recording evidence, and supporting one another. "I wasn't alone," she said simply. "My neighbors, my sister, my co-workers, even strangers helped me. That's what gave me courage. And that's what keeps me hopeful." Applause filled the small room, and Lena realized her story had become more than her own. It was now a shared reminder of resilience and justice. The memory of Mark did not vanish completely. Some nights, shadows of fear returned in dreams, but Lena had learned how to calm herself. She lit a small candle, sipped tea, and reminded herself of the truth: he was no longer a threat. The law had spoken. Her life belonged to her again. And with each sunrise, the distance between her and those dark nights grew wider. She also began writing in a journal. Every morning, she wrote 3 simple things she was grateful for: the sound of birds at dawn, the laughter of a patient, a phone call with Aisha. These small notes built a wall of light in her heart, protecting her from slipping back into fear. Over time, gratitude became her anchor, stronger than any memory of pain. One spring evening, Lena hosted a small dinner at her apartment. She invited Aisha, Daniel, Mrs. Collins, and a few close friends from the hospital. The table was filled with simple food: roasted vegetables, bread, and tea. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, the kind that heals without anyone noticing. As they ate, Lena looked around and felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She realized that love didn't need to be forced or demanded, it grew naturally in kindness, respect, and community. By the time summer arrived, Lena was walking taller. The bracelet on her wrist glimmered under the sun as she moved through her day with new energy. She had not only survived, she had transformed. Her story was no longer one of fear, but one of courage, truth, and the power of support. In quiet moments, she still sat by the balcony, listening to the wind chimes and watching her fern grow. She thought often about what she had learned: love is never about control, authority carries responsibility, and healing is built in small, patient steps. Most importantly, she knew that no matter how dark the night, there was always the possibility of morning light. And so Lena's story ended not with bitterness, but with peace. The conviction of her ex-lover was not just the result of a courtroom battle, it was the beginning of her freedom. She carried forward the lesson that justice and healing can coexist, and that resilience is born not in the absence of fear, but in the choice to stand tall despite it. Her life continued, steady and bright, shaped by truth, guided by hope, and strengthened by the love of those who stood with her. And though the past would always be a part of her, the future stretched wide and open, full of the promise of new beginnings, laughter, and a calm heart finally at rest.